Just a quick introduction. Gopal and I both work with the Ashoka, which is a global network of social entrepreneurs. We have about 4,500 fellows around the world, around 450 fellows in India. So it's a network of innovators, much like many of you all here are. And as Ashoka, we keep learning together with our fellows. So once a fellow is forever a fellow. So we have this almost like a sandpit of innovation that is constantly happening all around the world. And we create programs around supporting them or learning together with our fellows and things like that. And so the program that both of us lead in Ashoka is called Aspire, and it was co-created with an organization called Societal Thinking, and it basically focuses on how do we help social entrepreneurs think about exponential change. What does that really mean, right? So, I think that we want to take an example of Kishore. He kindly agreed to be the sort of to be used in this example to explain what do we really speak about, right? So, we basically run an accelerator program for social entrepreneurs, so we pick organizations to participate and we take them through an 18 months long journey. And we just want to share some of the learning. So the two books that you have here is basically some of the research and learnings that emerge from that journey that we have been sort of on ourselves for the last 3 years. So what do we mean really when we say, how do you think about exponential change, right? So what is exponential, right? It's kind of change that creates more change, right? So it's a different way of thinking about than think about how do I start my program? How do I do this? How do I solve the problem in this community? And maybe just to take an example of Kishore, because you all have heard him speak, and like he has been sort of openly sharing a lot, right, about what he wants to do, like the problem that he sees that women get. Women don't know where to go for help when they have domestic violence issues or whatever. So he wants to create a bot, right? So here is a typical case of an entrepreneur, even though he is within the police, but really he is an entrepreneur, right, within the police system who wants to solve a problem. And a typical way to go about it would be to say, okay, what can I do to solve this problem, right? So he'd say, I can make a bot. So he would make a bot, right? But at that point, if he didn't say, this is the problem I need to solve, but if he said, whose problem is it really? And then you could actually see that there are so many other people or organizations that actually care about this problem as much as Kishore does. And maybe they have a different aspect of the way they are solving it. So there's an NGO in the area that maybe have a safe home, or maybe there's an NGO that works with children, right? So unless you reframe that kind of a question from saying, is it my problem or is it a problem? And then what is the size of that problem? And who needs to participate to solve it? You see already that the pathway is beginning to diverge. And of course, the compulsion for action, almost like to say, I can do this, I can make a bot, I can solve. But we have seen, like, we have witnessed how Kishore, over the last 3 days, how many doubts and sort of challenges he comes across, right? Like, what happens if a child calls? What happens if police doesn't know what to do with the case that comes up on the bot, right? So these are the kind of things that in any of the things that you work on would always emerge, right? So what we sort of speak about, also the sort of research we have conducted in this book is basically to look at innovations by social entrepreneurs around the world that take that network building approach to solving a problem. So, and network effects, right? So what's network effects? Of course, in the field of technology, we all know, it's a much kind of hailed desire of the unicorns to say, okay, how do we become, how do you tap into networks? What is that? So you have a Uber app, and you have taxi drivers, we have the riders. The more riders you have, the more taxi drivers too, right? So that's the network effect, which makes the modern tech platforms grow. So what we were really curious about in Aspire was what makes social movements grow, social change grow in the same way. What are the network effects in that? And so we, in this book, we studied about 20 different organizations that around the world have created that sort of change at like a scale of a country, for example. What does that look like? And at the core of it is the network. Like in the case of Kishore, it would be like we were just discussing this today. And the thing is that it doesn't start from a point where you're already very big. You can begin to think as a network or a creator of a network from the very start, right? Like, so for Kishore, it's still a very early stage, but he can already start to think that instead of me being the problem solver, who do I need to bring to the table? So maybe it's the local NGOs that are there that can, if there are 5 different ways in which a victim may need to be, guided. Maybe police might be taking care of 2, but what about the 3 others, right? So how do I include those stakeholders from the beginning in the way that I even design my solution? Because I know that it's going to be a part of what I need to do, right? So, and while it may seem like it's, maybe it takes longer, right? It's easier just to create your own thing and sort of, implement it because it's much more controlled. The moment you begin to think scale, the challenge of where will you get the people, where will you get the human resource? Maybe you can find one counselor to sit in the police station in your district, but if it has to go to another district, will they find that person, right? So programs and this kind of nicely defined programmatic approaches really work well in a contained context, but once they begin to scale, they begin to, they can't scale exponentially, right? So that how do you design whatever it is that you design from the beginning with the idea of that change-making network being a participant in solving the problem, and you are creating what we call it is like an operating system for the network, right? So an operating system includes the technology. So there might be a Disha app, right? A Disha bot that connects people and it helps people navigate the system and who to go to, what is the problem. But it's an infrastructure inherently that connects the network, right? Connects the network where the police are there, and then who are the people in police who are most interested in helping. So like Kishore was saying, oh, I have women police officers in my district. Maybe they're not there in every police station, but can I motivate whatever women that we have in our district to create some kind of a task force around it, no? Because they would be motivated, they understand the difficulties of women, right? So he's already thinking, how do you motivate people in that, right? And then the next layer comes, who are the other people they may need. And so if from the beginning he is able to design this solution with this idea of a infrastructure, people, process, then that can be replicated in another district without, Kishore necessarily having to always be there also, right? Because, you may be posted somewhere else, you may be, you may have other things. So this solution, how does it begin to have a life of its own in a way, right? So also to imagine that, because if this really works, how do you think about another district elsewhere in the country being able to implement it, right? So, and I think that's where another big learning that we had has been about open source and infrastructure is an open source playground for the innovation. And if you see, I don't know, Gopal, maybe you could step in.
Give the example, yeah. Or maybe you want to pause and take questions.
Yeah.
Or shall we?
I don't know. Yeah, we can take a few reflections and questions before. kind of go on to speak.
Or we can, yeah. So also one of the important learnings what we had with our own fellows when they are thinking of the exponential change happening. So the whole idea is how do you amplify it or how do you do it through technology. So and when we look at, like, for them technology is a black box because they are expert in what they are doing. So and then we discovered that how open source tools are available for them, which can be repurposed to whatever they are thinking of. So it was a big aha moment for us and also for them. And that's how we started looking at who are these people. So one we came across very recently is by ThoughtWorks. I know we have some colleagues from ThoughtWorks here. So they have started something called as Bhami. And the whole idea they came up with is when JSS, the one of the largest hospital chain, approached them. So they started thinking, okay, if I develop something for hospital management, why it should be only for JSS, but it can be an infrastructure kind of a thing which can be for any hospital management. So, and in fact now they have gone to the level of even healthcare service delivery models, so like telehealth and different modules are added in that. So the whole idea of making an open source and reaching out. So it's now 8 years old project and it has already reached 50 countries. So imagine when you do open source, what kind of a power it has to reach so many people, and people start, and the beauty of this is the interface, the user interface gives a feedback loop. So as users, they keep giving feedback loop and they keep improving it. So, and of course because it's housed in ThoughtWorks, so they have 30 engineers attached to it. But the best part is it's open source for anyone working in the health sector.
So just to clarify, JSS is it's an NGO that actually works in very resource constrained areas. So when they approached ThoughtWorks, they needed a product that didn't exist in the market for like a hospital in a rural area, right? And when they designed it, and you have to design it open from the start. Like it cannot be an afterthought. Openness cannot be an afterthought. And so they said, can it work in any hospital? And now, in Africa, everywhere, in many places in South Asia, like Gopal mentioned. And it can be used by a small organization which literally runs one hospital in a village to, a massive organization like Red Cross, for example. And the point here is that how can the infrastructure that you are creating create the opportunity for co-creation? Right? So, and I think Jugalbandi in that sense is a perfect case in point in this room, right? Like how many of you have been able to just up your game in a couple of days because that layer of infrastructure exists for you to play with, right? And so, and it's the same thing with Kishore, right? Like if he creates his bot, and obviously right now it's early days, but if he open sources it, tomorrow another organization that maybe cares about another issue, but could use all the learnings and everything that's been put into it to develop something that works for them. Similarly with Jugalbandi, Rushi, for example, you already use it, and could the features that you have developed for your case be added back into the open source infrastructure so that that game becomes better for everyone, right? So that's the idea. So, and the co-creation, what is fascinating that with technology specifically, co-creation can really happen at multiple levels. So one is the co-creation at the level of the network, right? So, like Kishore may have a solution to what police officers can do, how they could do things differently. And then there are all the other partners who can come in, and he can include them in design of the technology and the participation, in the problem solving of the process. But it's also that if, say, another organization takes it up in another state, whatever they develop can come back into that infrastructure, right? So, and we could see how after a couple of years, no organization would need to develop their own bot for working with people that they, whatever victims of abuse or whatever their use case, right? There are multiple, but that logic is quite similar in whichever case you want, right? So one of the big learnings we have had is, especially in applying of technologies, when you build something, how do you really make the game better for everybody? And most importantly, what we have seen, the organization that build their own proprietary technology, what happens in the end is that, do they have the resources to sustain it? More often than not, they don't. Right? And to keep innovating and to keep integrating new features, right? So even if you raise that grant to make it happen once, you may not be able to have to find. And we have seen multiple.
Yeah, just a question, right? So there's a big question on sustainability, right? So if I take the two different examples, I don't know the JSS example that well.
Sure.
But it seems that one is the example of an OS, right, which is then available for anyone to use and customize. Jugalbandi is an infrastructure layer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
With Jugalbandi, it's very clear because it's the infra layer. You can experiment. There are clear cost caps, right? Data storage caps, etc. Right. So the experimentation layer is fine, right? You have funding from some source, and you're enabling people to experiment. The moment you scale, you go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But on the OS side, right? How do you continue to support an OS that's now being used by hundreds of organizations? Because you also need a sustainability model.
But they're not funding that. So only the code is open source, but it's not open source doesn't mean free, right? So if Red Cross uses Bandi,
it's a freedom. It's a freedom to use.
Right? If they use Bandi,
so they have a business model to make it sustainable,
it's
right?
not.
Because
No. So for ThoughtWorks, it's a very unique example. That's why we like to speak about it, because they have this vertical in the company that actually it's social impact vertical. So it's treated as one of the business vertical, but it doesn't generate revenue. So, and they work on Bami as their primary product from India. And so ThoughtWorks invested something like $12 million into this. So of course but we're also not creating hospital management software, right? I mean, not everybody is, right? But suppose if Red Cross picks it up, they obviously run it on their own servers, so they absorb that cost. And if they want to develop a new feature, what ThoughtWorks says is that we can do it for you. You have to pay. It's a contract. You have to pay for developing it, and we encourage you to open source it. So they don't enforce it, but a lot of the users who work there
becomes contributors. To the.
All I'm saying is there has to be, if you're enabling an OS,
Yeah.
right, open sourcing an OS, you need a business model to make that scalable. If you're enabling experimentation infra, you need some source of funding, right? And then scale. So I think in all of this, sustainability is key, right? Same argument you're making for why it should be open source, right? Because making it open source is a case for sustainability, so you better make sure that sustainability is built in, otherwise it defeats the purpose.
And that's why in fact we had the same question. So, but when we talked to the FOSS United, which Meher and all are also very familiar with, so they said they have a large community who solves it now. So it doesn't depend on one vendor who will solve it for you. Also, we had this concern of the time. Let's say if I have a rundown, and how much time it takes if I'm completely running on open source. So this is as the community grows, the kind of a response rate you get is much faster. So there is an ecosystem already slowly building up. And that's why we wanted to also talk about this alliance which we are bringing up, because we realize these are all a system is there, but in a way little broken. Like there are a lot of open source open source tools which can be used. So, but many people are not aware, and sometimes they also don't work with each other. So we are just launching an alliance called as OSS, Open Source Alliance for Social Innovation and Sustainability. So the whole idea is to get 2022 these people who are doing the tools, open source tools, to come together and kind of give them more first-hand experiences to social entrepreneurs. So that we are doing on 14th September. So we thought we also want to invite all of you, in case if you happen to be in Bangalore, do come. So you can see what is there available for you to immediately take and repurpose also.
But of course, it's like what you're saying, that building that community of adoption is work, right? So Jugalbandi wouldn't have been used unless all of this has happened, or but will it become a better tool because it's used by so many people, especially if people begin to contribute back and open source what they do? Yes, it will, right? So, and that's kind of the culture that we are sort of inviting into the sector, because we've seen it works.
Yeah, but I think also the clarity, right? So, and So I think with Jugalbandi, I have to say it's very clear what you get and what you don't.
Yes.
Right? Expectations are very clear, what you need to do is very clear.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of open source tools where it says something on the website, but when you engage, it's suddenly not as open source as you thought it was, right? Which becomes a big challenge.
Yeah, and
right? Oh, it's open source, but oh, it's actually not open source, right? So that's the other. So it would be interesting with your alliance, right, to have some minimum accepted, like we have responsible AI principles, right? Open source principles to say, hey, if you're saying it's open source, it should at least meet these criteria.
Meet this,
3 or 4, right? Not like 10 or 11.
Yeah, so there is an open wash also. That's what we hear. So we really, as Ashoka and as Aspire, we really come into this with the network thinking, right? And what we see is that technology is, it's an infrastructure for your network to really thrive, right? So, and of course, Force United and Tinker Hub are part of the Oasis, so they will be the ones who would sort of, the more technical aspects of that. I don't take any chance to speak about technology in this room. So we just talk about the thinking, right? And sort of how do you approach it? Because you can't create a project like if an and we were fascinated that there are some organizations, say Infosys, they say that anything we touch that's pro bono, if we give our time, has to be open source. So that's a really helpful guideline, for example, right? So that's the sort of culture we want to bring in the sector. We think that if we do enough of that and enough of synergy forms, like there's still a lot of sort of disparate things happening everywhere, and a lot of people don't know what's going on. So that's one of the ways that we are trying to orchestrate that a little more. And so just to maybe close it with, just to describe these 2 reports, and everybody's welcome to take a copy. In this report, what we have done is actually study the actual digital platforms that are created by social entrepreneurs and for impact, right? So, and what are the design principles for doing that, which is quite fundamentally different than building platforms for profit, right? Because as your goal is different, everything that you do ends up being different. And so these are some of the useful design principles to go back to if you are thinking about designing a platform. And in this book actually, and this came later, a year later, what we realized is that whether there was a platform or no platform, there needs to be a network. For impact at scale, there has to be a network, or for even sustainable impact. And so we said, who are those people who are real sort of masters of building networks, right? And so we studied their models and interviewed them. We worked, the author is a board member of Ashoka, so we worked with her on sort of the research, and then she just published this book. So yeah, you're welcome to have a copy. Yeah. We can pass it around, or if there is any questions or thoughts on this.
So just a +1, right? If you look at the big book, right? I think what's interesting is the ability creating solvers and opening a value creation, right? Those are fundamentally different. I don't think the other principles are that different from for-profit networks, but at least because the for-profit network will say, hey, I want to be the solver in all cases, and I want to keep value creation to myself. But the ability to actually do those 2 things is quite difficult and quite.
Also agency, activating agency, right? So like what we were discussing about the responsible AI and whatever, any sort of responsible technology, right? That you are not trying to engage people for the sake of sort of maximizing their engagement and time. You are trying to actually, with a minimal amount of time that they spend with you, actually maximum amount of positive action that happens in the real world, right? So that's one. Another one which we realized also, it's a nice design principle where we speak about, and that kind of led to the creation of this book, which is that activating change offline. That however much you would hope to say, like the way Uber or Amazon works, it's all platform and digital. When it comes to social issues, the complexity of them, there is always a human network at play. It's real people doing real things on the ground, and technology only facilitates some specific transactions in that. So you can't move away from that. You know, very few, we can only think of one or two examples where it's like, what, fully digital. You know, otherwise, when you're trying to reach out to vulnerable communities, marginalized communities, that effort of building the understanding or support or whatever the cohesion around the vision locally, it happens offline. You can't really move away from that. And it may seem like an inefficiency, but it is a necessity in design.
Do you think we could also have some of these, open source or scalable ventures which may not be physical, but it could have different modes of, virtual reaching out? Like we said, technology can be accessed in multiple ways, right? You have your mobile phones, but you also have telephones, or we could have. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Like how mobile phones could be.
Or no, just this, on the last point you made, that you need to have a physical presence to sort of scale social ventures.
But it's not always that you have to have the presence, right? Like that's the beauty, right? So there have to be real people doing something on the ground. But whether it's you directly or not, so like I'll give you an example. There's a fellow in the United States and he runs a platform called Donors Choose. So it's basically a platform that allows teachers to post their dream projects, like I want to have a telescope in my room to talk to kids about astronomy. And the donors can donate money for the project, right? So the power of the platform is that it connects people who have never donated to public schools to the most inspired and excited teachers, right? So that's the transaction done online. But what happens offline is that one teacher in that school, once she gets it done, she motivates other teachers to do it in the school, right? So that's the network effect, that you have that role of a champion of that idea, of that approach, and you help your other peers, right? And then teachers grow up in that ladder of engagement so they can help vet other projects or help other teachers, right? So there is that. We speak in the Changemaking network book about that ladder of a change maker, that you might start small, you might say, I'm doing this for myself because I want to solve the problem. Then that feels really good because you've done it and it's very satisfying. And you say, hey, I could help another person figure it out, right? So, and we figured actually that being quite strategic about how do you design that ladder of engagement for your change makers, whoever they are in your network, is really necessary if you want that to grow and sustain, right? So, like if you see Donors Choose, it's not necessarily that like there's a Donors Choose staff in every school. They work now in every third school, public school in America, right? So, but they've created a system where that offline activity happens through their network, through the participation of whoever people from the platform to online.
So it's sometimes also unlocking, like that system exists, you're just unlocking that interaction through this channel. So like even in Kishore's case, that system exists. What he's trying to do is unlock that so that the system works for the people who are in difficult situations.
So after analyzing how this change network or change making network has worked, and you would have seen several networks operate, so do you have a critical model in mind that for anything to function right for the network there needs to be a certain criticality? What do you see? What is that least common denominator that you expect? Like we understand the power of network, but when do you see it actually functioning? Like when, how do I take a call? What should be enough, or when to decide? Okay, let's not. It's always there are pros and cons, right? At least I should do this to make this network sustainable. And at the initial design itself, so that I can choose whether to pursue it or not. If I invest some resources and some time, is there some common model that I can template or sort? I can imagine now and decide to place a roadmap for it.
So I'll go back to a conversation we had at lunch where I said, we said, can you find some NGOs that are already working with the same community? And you said, yeah, but what do they care about Disha? Why would they want to help me? How do I get them, if we do something, how do I get them to follow the SOP that needs to be followed? And I think that reframing it from saying, can you find people who care as much as you do about that issue? And I bet you would, and then can you actually think through that solution with them? And that is the first prerequisite for any network. Is there a shared goal, right? Like, is the shared goal that every woman, who faces violence has a way within her community to find help, or whatever that, I'm just shooting my mouth, but something like that, right? Can you find people who care enough about this, and can you create, then the model is created with them to address it. So if you don't have the shared vision, that's definitely not a starter for a network, right? Then what we have sort of thought through, and there are many design principles in the book, but to kind of really keep it super simple, we thought of this idea of a circle of doing, right? So it's like, who passes the ball to whom in the network, right? So what happens, right? So if you think about who plays what role, so maybe there's a community counselor who has a certain role to play. There is a police officer, there's a woman police, chapter in your district, and they are trained in doing specific things. Then there's maybe a few lawyers or somebody who can do something, right? So who are those few critical nodes, and it doesn't have to be many, just the most important ones. And what is the specific role they play in this specific thing, which is a woman in distress finds the help she needs locally, right? So if you can construct that, that's a start of a network, right? And then you're just refining that interactions, and you can see where technology is most useful, right? So is maybe connecting that woman to the right node when she needs it, or whatever that may be, right? But if you have that circle of doing within the network, then you are probably onto something really helpful, because then you can imagine that circle of doing happening in another place with other local contextual actors.
Maybe one example to draw parallel is one of our fellow, he works in education, and he looked at it very differently. He said the outcomes are very poor, and everyone is trying to attend through teacher, school system, but he found the immediate next person to the child is a parent. So, and it's not like he's working with 1,000 parents, he made parents champions. So there are 100 parents champions who in turn have reached to 100 parents, each one of them. So it's a 10,000 network, and that imagine that 10,000 will become into 100 now. So he is only in touch with 100. So that's how he unlocked that existing system, and then ultimately the children are getting. So what he do is he provide that intelligence, or provide the module, or provide that infrastructure to parents to use it then.
So where I'm coming from is this network effect is it is exponential and it's excellent. But what is that minimum thing that he should have in order to make it functional? For example, the ThoughtWorks example that we see, for any network to be functional, there should be one crucial driver, somebody who keeps it running, maybe the person who started it, or maybe the person who has more ownership, or maybe who wants to, who is more affected, or maybe who is closely related to the goal. He would keep joining other dots, and maybe if somebody is not correct, or maybe bringing more people into the network. And there is also some tech partner, or these days eventually tech can't do everything, but I don't think we can do things without some part of tech at least.
Yeah.
And ultimately the sustainability part also comes in, like where would the fuel come from? So Jugalbandi is amazing. So Jugalbandi has Bhashini to give free translation tools from Indian languages, but it also has an OpenAI component which needs to be paid for. So how essential is it? Like how can I find those critical elements? Like to build this network, these three are essential: a driver, a source of funding or a source of sustainability, and
And an amplifier maybe,
Yeah.
kind of.
So what are those critical components? Is there something or?
Well, these are pretty, seem to be pretty critical, right?
Sorry, before you get into sort of conversation, one quick announcement. Justice Mushtaq and Justice Raja of the Kerala High Court are on their way here. They're reaching in about 30 minutes, just to let you all know that they're very excited to be here and they would love to know all about your problem statements and sort of speak with all of you. So yes, just a quick shout out.
That's exciting.
Thank you.
So honestly, we don't have all the answers. So sustainability, yeah, of course, and like you said, right, you might be able to use, but so what is the sustainability? Where will it come? Say for what you are designing, it's a good question, and it needs to be thought about. Right? Can it come from police and the leadership? The leadership is important, right? Because there is a leadership that keeps bringing actors together in a sense. It is a part of leadership. So, but it's also good to see how do you do it. And for instance, like what we are doing now, and it's complex, honestly. Like with Oasis, which is this open source network, we are 6 organizations. So there is Ashoka, there is Tinker Hub, there is Force United, there is GitHub, there's
Tech for Good Lab.
and Tech for Good, right? So, and we are just trying to create an event together. Okay, and it's hard. Okay, so forget like doing something really life changing, like because it's easier, right? I just take the decision, I do it. Like we all know how to function like that. But but like we said that for us to build a cohesion between us as actors, and that we see eye to eye, that we trust each other, that we all own this event together, is much more important in a way than the event itself, right? It's just an exercise of actually getting into it, right? So that's what we decided to prioritize. So even if it's more difficult, and you can be our judges how badly event turns out, then that's what we prioritize.
Well, part of the answer you already have, right? Like, you started off with that point saying that there has to be, for the network to exist, there has to be a shared goal, right? And what you're explaining right now, you're basically, when you said whether we are cohesive or not, is essentially you're aligning on the goal, right? We may say we are aligned on the goal, but our definition in our own heads as individual entities, individuals, may be very different, right? So that first step of sort of coming together and doing something small to test that is I think, in my view, a starting point to get the network effect going, right? And then everything else sort of, of course, you need a driver, you need sort of, something to sustain the flow, if I use like a very commercial sense, right?
But Kishore, I think the interesting thing for you to think about is networks with a single driver have a single point of failure. So if you have shared goals, shared values, you're much better off with multiple drivers, multiple solvers, right? So I think unlike a for-profit entity where there's one solver, there's, it's very clear what the goal is. You're better off building a network with multiple drivers and solvers.
I would love to have that network. In my mind what is running is how do I start it, and if I have some finite amount of time and resources, on which critical blocks I would first focus on, what would I first focus upon. For example, even in this case, right, I can test it out, but the moment it becomes, should I first focus on sustainability, somebody who would back this cause, maybe it is also in their mission, or should I first reach out to the content partners who would elaborately study what all could go wrong, responsible AI. But if I spend everything that I have here, the sustainability part will not take off at all. To sustain this, so there is a sequence of actions. I'm trying to maybe there is no method to do it, but I'm trying to see how I can see some pattern and not make mistakes.
Yeah. Welcome to the life of
Or maybe learn more from them. So many people
all
have
the
done it.
entrepreneurs in the room
But just having heard you now for 2 days, right? You might want to think about, you have the maximum influence within your organization, which is the police, right? And you articulated a use case yesterday that said, look, my own constables or whatever the local officer at the lowest level often doesn't know what to do, etc. Right? So even if it's, giving them the advice, because there are some, instances where people actually come in and they get the wrong reaction, and then that reinforces the negative cycle, which is I won't come in again, right? Actually planning that out so that you can have an MVP with an officer. That takes out a lot of concerns about interaction with minors, etc., right? If you build that, right, because that gives you some fuel, that gives you use case, deployment, etc. And then to Ira's point, right, which are the 2 or 3 organizations that care as much about this as you do. So they will take it on and say, oh my God, like, you're bringing something that I don't have, and we're going to run with it with you, right? Because right now you're running alone. Point is, it's not a 100-meter dash, right? It's a, it's a mile relay, right? So whoever the rest of the members of the relay team, how do you say it's not 100 meters, it's the full mile? So that's, I think, what you need to solve for. Do you have a baton, right? Do you have a racetrack?
Actually, I have a slightly different perspective. Right? Like this, in this context, right? Each one it could be a very different decision. But if somebody is working with limited resources, it is actually the question to solve for is, do you get somebody who's going to take care of this till it becomes self-sustainable, or do you put the pieces together, show that this can be sustainable, and then take it to somewhere? That's what you're grappling with, if I understood correctly. Right? So I don't know if there are examples of what has worked better that might be useful to learn from, or it's right now too early to, and we just have to figure it out.
Well, I mean, I think that we could look at it from a financing perspective, right? Because it's interesting, because all the social entrepreneurs, when they think about impact at scale, they'll think, oh, the public system will adopt it. So here we have the public system, it's like, where do I get money?
Yeah.
So we're like, we always think you are the ones who are money.
But I think it depends on what this is, right? I mean, this is, you have to decide what this is.
It's not public system, whether it can fund or not. We do fund, we have lots of money, but it is very, what do I call it? It's tied up. Strictly tied up, and how it is going to be used. There's a lot of tendering process, there are several things. So that will only be unlocked when we show the impact on ground and we make them compelled to do it. A lot of public funding doesn't come unless you compel them to do that, especially for policing. Police is not a department which generates revenue. If you build a building, that's why you see roads, they get funds. Because they don't, otherwise, constituents simply say that we won't, that they can see it. Who can perceive law and order? And especially states like in South, where grave crimes are not that. And in fact, within policing, the days for us was much better. When the crime rate was higher, there was insurgency. Because whatever we used to ask, they used to get sanctioned very fast. The better we work, the priority of funding goes down. And all from India, right? So several of them are. So when do you notice police? When do you appreciate police? So there is a big event going on here. If everything goes very well, would you know that who did the job? No, because our perfect metric or indicator is not getting noticed, avoiding failure. But the moment something goes wrong, that will always get highlighted, and that's a part of job. If we do our, like my wife is a collector, if she builds a building, there is a building to be seen. For me, it's very abstract, unless you are personally affected by it.
But Kishore, in this case, it's an area where unfortunately, things are not going well. The area you picked is an area where things are not going well. It's also a very emotional raw area, right? So the other piece is the reason, like, it's interesting, like partner at the beginning, I would suggest, is because the advocacy piece, right? The additional SP saying, look, our processes suck and we are doing a good job might be challenging, right? But an NGO can actually come and say that, and you can say, okay, I'll partner with you, right? Then you're proactively building something. Because this is an area where things are not going well. It's not acknowledged, but it's very easy to make that very apparent.
Yeah.
Right? That we suck at this collectively today.
Dial back a little bit on working with government. So I've kind of been inside for a bit, and I was just telling him about one product done by the not named government for 6x the price that we did, and our product today is much better. But at the moment, there are certain political obligations, etc. And so that's of course the reality of the public procurement process. The other piece is there typically a bureaucrat, like he said, they're lauded for towing the line, lauded for ensuring they don't deviate. There are no brownie points for innovation. So even when you want to go for, typically impact organizations get the government on as a client. The B2G is like a celebrated thing. The government wants to talk to you when you have a few million things already operational, because as a bureaucrat, your neck is on the line to experiment with something that was barely had proof points. And now if you need that money to already scale and reach that point, who is doing that? And that's often a missing question.
And like you rightly mentioned, right, the incentives for experimentation are very low and adverse. However, there is no bar. If I keep continue doing what I'm doing,
but
I'm very good.
I think that depends on the level. So I'll speak from my own experience, right? So I agree with you, right? At the ground level, so if I take sort of the central bureaucracy, right? You go to a joint or a principal secretary, joint secretary. You go to the minister. Ministers, let's separate out. Very different response if you go 3 levels below. 3 levels below, it's let's toe the line. Let's not cause any waves. If you're talking at sort of a true decision maker, you can make a difference, right? But the question is, it's not easy.
How many experience? I was working essentially at a CS and a PS level. And currently, another thing I'm doing is literally talking to CMO level. It's really
I differ in this aspect. I see this is where the course correction needs to be done. The lot of innovation or even the spirit to do it. It took a lot to me to come here, securing some leave here. While it's like I had to convince someone it's like a hobby project in their mind. So when you said the more that we are entrenched and deeper at the higher level we go, sometimes we are far away from the cutting edge. The second thing, you have seen enough failures so far, and the best part, how you have said right that it's not governments are always very bad at executing projects. The project play that I have spoken about. Initially, the NGO that who we contacted gave a quotation of 2,50,000 per playground. We got it done at 35,000 rupees. Governments are very good when the correct freedom is given and when the project is appreciated and immediately got scaled. Now those 6 playgrounds that we created, that immediately went to 58, and then the 58 is now being scaled across 3 districts. So there is acceptance but the thing is, you have to prove it before.
Yes.
You have to run the pilot. So you have to get it, people should see it. Taking an abstract concept like the Disha board, if not for Jugalbandi, we have designed all these frameworks, concept notes for how public grievance redressal should happen. We have sent it to CMO. CMO was very interested. But the moment you don't have something which is already working with public, it's very difficult to get a lot of funding to it. And the critical mass should be there. They should see, oh, this is working. Like 108 services in Andhra, right? The first state to start with this emergency ambulance. It started with one pilot project.
Yeah, it was probably 2 ambulances.
2 ambulances. And how it started, initially everyone was against the idea. It's like, why should government spend 95% of the ambulance and 5% will be given by GMR, and why should we do that? Then what GMR did, okay, let's not launch everything, we'll only pick up two ambulances, and covered up all the news articles. Like, the ambulance is generating such positive vibe, positive news. The moment it generates some impact on the ground and it has some visibility, government will rush to make it work.
Yeah.
The proof of the pudding is, how do we show that impact and how do you support these ground level innovations? That doesn't happen at PS level. PS level it happens, it is going to be an entire system by the time it comes to the ground. It's me, it's my constables, it's my SIs, it's my DSPs who are operating the system. And if there are some excellent people who involve these people right from the start of the design of the, like CCTNS, right? I would want it to be integratable with Python. I would want to be, so for APIs I couldn't get to interact with that. There are several, when you prepare RFP without proper technical background, you are developing systems, so many systems each not talking to each other. I would bet today, if you combine all the IT expenditure that we made, with 10% of that expenditure, you could have done all the 100% of products, because there would be a lot of overlap. There will be huge overlap, but there is no common standard. There is no common maintenance. It's more like, you want a product, these are the features I want, make an RFP. I want a chatbot, TCS, develop it.
Then every state will do that.
They'll take 5 again. Every state, within the departments.
There's a story with Ishram. There is a central portal. Every state created its portal. States that did not agree politically weren't aligned with the state created their own. So there is a triple registration burden now on the ground, and they have no machinery to implement this. So tap into the same CSC and whatever networks, and those same networks are tapped by everyone. So for example, the revenue, because municipal, it is outside the jurisdiction of municipal, so it goes to revenue, the collector's office. They don't have the infra to go into municipal areas and do this. So I mean, this is.
But it's not all sad story, right? There are very good things that are happening. It's not that governments are not doing it.
You have your answer, no?
Yeah.
You said it so many times. What you really need
Yeah.
to get this
The
sustainable is the proof that it can work in your jurisdiction, where you have the most power. Can you show that this can work, and then see where that goes? As a network, not as a
champion of that.
And the power of network where I see it, right? I can only discuss this with my bosses, but the pressure can come from several areas, right? There could be several channels. It's me who is presenting to my bosses saying these are, this is good. But now if I have Agami, if I have Jugalbandi on board, if I have OpenAI, there are several channels that this information is going out. See, there is something like this. Can we do this? I think the word of the mouth spreads and more people would reach out. Hopefully we'll launch it soon.
Yeah, and the whole idea is network should not be an afterthought then. You know, that should be part of your.
The other questions, reflections, thoughts.
I have a question. It might seem a very simple question, but in your experience, what do you think are like the blunders or mistakes that people make when building out the network system itself initially?
I think it's intrinsically just not a linear journey, so it's very hard to say what are the mistakes.
Okay.
Right? Like it's very hard to because it takes years for these networks to come to you. But one of the interesting insights that we have learned is that the change-making networks are really they are vertical in nature. So they have people from various levels in society. So it's like you have a constable and say that I already can visualize that women's chapter, women policemen chapter in your district, that comes together. So, And then you keep like, and then there's Kishore, and then there might be someone at the more senior level, you know, who maybe in the police structure cares about this. So actually they all are a part of that network. So how do you build it out in such a way that you have the system to engage people on the ground at scale, but you also know, you know, who are the important actors at the top who matter, right? So you begin building that alignment, because some things, while you need to build from bottom up, some things have to come from the top, no? Like what he was saying. So how do you always traverse these levels in the network and keep people engaged and motivated and owning that vision, no? So like, can he find champions for this idea, you know, in senior police officers, whatever, beyond sort of whom he's interacting, whatever, right? So it's not a common mistake. I think there's too, it's just always too iterative to say what are the common mistakes. But a common mistake would be that when you don't think about it from the beginning, like, or if you build technology, we actually have had interactions with people who, for example, built something, and they were from Europe, and they built portals for disability or something, and then we showed them something that was developed here, and they said, oh, I wish I thought about this, you know, because once you build a closed system, you can't open it. Like, it's not possible. So that's a design decision that you make at the beginning, and it not only with technology, also with even with the idea, right? Like, because if you start something by yourself, then you become the prisoner of your organization, the structure you created. It's very difficult to then say, everybody come and join me in my organization. You know, like that doesn't work.
I think this is where I saw, initially when we started the bot, I just we had another bot, we had it not on Telegram, but the Hugging Face instance when we were experimenting before coming to legal work. I randomly kept the name AP Police. Then I shared it to my Karnataka senior. I didn't expect that for him to experiment that AP Police, he asked me, could you change it to Indian Police? See, subconsciously the more we the easier that we make everyone owner and not attach any credit to it. Like, I think the success for the network lies there.
And your NGOs will say, can we not have police in the name?
I guess it's shared ownership right at the start, so the vision gets built a lot faster.
And engaging them also, like not leaving anyone out.
Yeah. And actually, the point he makes is very good, because it's not a mistake, but it's almost like a internal barrier sometimes, because you know that it's okay not to put your name to it. It's okay not to take credit for it, because only then can you really ignite that collective action. And like, I'll give you an example. I think Agami itself, right, that space that we have here, is such a great example. Like, they could have chosen to say, we're gonna transform the justice system. We're gonna do it, right? And they would have built some program and this and this and that, right? So that was a design decision to say, we're gonna create the ecosystem of innovators, right? And so that's why all of this is possible, right? So it's like, once you take that decision, what happens after that is, and they're okay with, you know, Agami not being credited for all the innovations that come out of that ecosystem.
It's also very consistent, right? If your objective is, I want to get the maximum impact across the most amount of people in the shortest amount of time, the natural, logical choice is to say it's an open ecosystem and we won't take credit.
Yeah.
If you take credit, then you have to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
So logically, it makes a lot of sense. That's how you get open systems.
The chain got killed even before it started. The chain reaction, right? If I start,
Yes.
The project play, we did it, and we have kept the entire documentation how it was done, from nuts and bolts, everything that was used. Not code open source, but the physical manufacturing of it. Now it's very easy for anybody to start it, and immediately already people have started using it. I think giving out information as much as possible, and all relevant information would and defining the goal as well. the goal is not how many playgrounds we are building. The goal should be how many playgrounds are being built.
Yeah,
Very nice.
exactly. Yeah.
Very nice. So I think somewhere we can connect to what we were also talking, how the design should be. I think it's a very good. I think your statement was really good.
Yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
note to close, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
It was lovely chatting with everyone.